Hello, my name's Edwin. I'm a counsellor and I work from my clinic Magic Hands Calm Minds in Colford in the Forest of Dean, and this is one of a series of videos about things that cause people emotional distress and unease and affect their overall mental well-being. So not necessarily mental health conditions, but things which might lead to mental health conditions and which people might not even register are really a thing that they should be aware of. So today I'm going to talk about depression and grief. Now, both of those are obviously states where you're unhappy, and they can feel very similar when you're going through them. Now, you can have depression and be grieving at the same time, but they are separate and distinct things. The most important difference between them is that grief is a natural process. You are designed to grieve if you lose something or someone that is precious to you. So when we think of grief, we tend to think of bereavement, but it can be because you've lost your job, or you've been obliged to move from a place that you really loved, or it could even be because you've lost your car. If your car is stolen and burnt out, that can cause grief as well. It's when you've lost something that's important to you. Now, the way grief works, you may have heard of a thing called the Kubler-Ross curve, which has been kind of assimilated into business change in recent years, but the Kubler-Ross curve is the grief process. It is the way your brain responds to that loss. And there are several stages. You don't go through them necessarily in order. There isn't a kind of set period, this one lasts 3 weeks and this one takes 2 months and this one lasts a year. It takes as long as it takes. And you might go through them several times. You might go through 3 or 4 of them and then come back to the first one. There is no rule and there is no correct way to grieve. You grieve in the way that is specific to you. Now, as I've already said, grief is an unpleasant feeling. So the natural tendency is to try and push it away. And we're encouraged to do that a lot in society. People will say, well, it's time that you moved on. Don't harp on it. Just be positive. Oh, well, you've got to go back to work. So, time to pull yourself together. Oh, I must be strong for the children. So there are lots and lots of reasons why we feel that we shouldn't feel grief. In addition to the obvious, it's not a nice experience to go through. So why should we feel it? Grief, as I've said, is something you are designed to do. So you've lost something precious. That's horrible. You can, over time, learn to live your life without that precious thing. That might be relatively easy. It might be enormously difficult. But having gone through that grieving process, you will come out the other end. Life may never be the same again, but it's now livable. You can carry on with the things that you do without that person or that thing in your life. If you don't go through that grieving process, it stays there. So by pushing the feelings away and pretending they're not happening, what you actually end up doing is making them more powerful in the long run. And they will stay locked away in the back of your mind, and every so often they will bounce up and force you to take notice of them, and you will think, oh no, this is horrible, I can't deal with this, I will push it away again. And you might do that for years. But it will be having a toll on you, on your emotional state, your mental state, and on your physical state. There is evidence to suggest that unresolved grief is a prime trigger for cancer. So it can actually kill you. Not a good thing. Depression, on the other hand, is an illness. It's a mental disorder. And that's quite an alarming term. So we don't tend to describe it as a mental disorder. But that's what it is. It is your brain responding in an unhelpful way to things that are going on around you. Now, there are lots of theories as to what causes depression. Some people will say it's genetic. Some people say it's purely to do with events, having experienced trauma or something of that nature. And it's more likely to be a mixture of both. So people will often say, my parents are depressed, I'm depressed, therefore it must be hereditary. The very fact you grew up with depressed parents is enough to give you depression. That is, for a small child, that is trauma. So again, people often deny they have depression because they haven't had any trauma in their lives, but trauma is not just earth-shattering, life-changing events. It can be lower level, continual things like emotionally disengaged parents. So depression is something that we can treat, and we can treat it with a variety of things. So we can use therapy, we can use medication to address the chemical imbalance in the brain, and we can use things like exercise to improve our mood in the short term. So depression is a treatable state. Grief is not. Grief has to happen. And people will often say, oh, I should be over this by now. I should be all right. I'm not coping as well as I should be with the loss of my mother, sister, husband, child. How well you should be coping with those things has never been adequately explained. But what it generally means is, don't bring your misery around here because I don't know how to cope with it. It's very inconvenient for me. So as a therapist, if you come to me with grief, I'll help you work through what it is you've lost, how that's affected you, what impact that's had on your life, and what you can do about it. If you have depression, I'll treat that completely differently, and I will talk about what's happened to you in the past, what beliefs you have, what values you have, what circumstances you're in that lead you to feeling good or bad, and we principally work on changing how you feel about things rather than what you're doing. So they're quite different things, and although they can feel very similar, they are absolutely not the same in the way they should be handled and treated. In fact, you can't treat grief, as I've already said. Grief happens. It's like saying I want to treat the fact that I'm growing taller. It can't be done. So if you have had a bereavement or a loss and you're feeling awful and you're thinking, God, I should be getting over this by now, throw that thought away. It is a very unhelpful thought. You are dealing with it in the way you need to deal with it. But the important thing is that you should deal with it. Putting it to the back of your mind and pretending it's not there is not dealing with it. It will not go away. It will not get better by you ignoring it. So by all means, talk to somebody, and talking is one of the best things you can do for grief. But don't feel that there's something wrong with you because you're grieving. Quite the reverse. If on the other hand you have depression, whether or not you've suffered a loss, that is something that needs to be treated. So look for self-help books, look for a therapist, look for medication, look for something that can cause you to recover from that situation. So I hope that's helpful. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave me a comment and let me know what you thought of it, and do feel free to share it with friends and family if you think it will be useful for them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.